Well, I have a fancy clip-on mic. It's a real pleasure to be here today, everyone. We're going to be talking about municipal data, which is something that I don't know very much about, but I have a quick poll for you. How many of you guys live in New York City? Okay, those of you who don't live in New York City, do you live in a city? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you live in some place with a local government? Everyone. Okay, great. Whoa, what happened to my chair? That was mean. I could have fallen down. So the point here is that we actually live in an era of proliferating data, proliferating municipal data, no matter what municipality that is. The New York City Open Data portal itself has 1,300 data sets available, including business, city government, education, environment, health, housing and development, public safety, recreation, social services, and transportation. And if you're diligent, it's possible to get even more than that from Freedom of Information Law requests, FOIL requests for short. So I'm looking at a room full of data scientists, right? How many of you think that there's something useful for humanity that we ought to be able to do with that data? Raise your hand. Yes, great. So at least half of you think so. Well, that's what we're here to discuss today. So with our distinguished panel, let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have Amen Mashariki, the Chief Analytics Officer for New York City. We have Greg Dobler, who is the Associate Director for Physical Sciences at the Center for Urban Science and Progress at NYU. We have John Krause, who is a Technical Research Fellow at the GovLab, also at NYU. And we have Ben Wellington, who's a founder and blogger of iQuant New York and a researcher at 2 Sigma. So we're here today to discuss the ins and outs of municipal data usage, and hopefully we'll all walk away with some sense of how data can make our city better, or our town government. Okay, so to start then, I'd love it if each one of you, from left to right, stage left, can introduce yourself briefly and what your role is.
Sure, thank you. I'm Mashariki again, and the Chief Analytics Officer. Also, I have a second title, which is Chief Open Platform Officer, which in that role, my job is to implement Local Law 11 of 2012 for New York City, which is the open data law. So my office is the business owner of the open data. Also, I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. And I guess in short, the way we see ourselves is the civic intelligence hub for the city of New York. The way we like to think of things is that we spend a lot of time understanding characteristics and features of the urban landscape. So it's sort of like the needle in a haystack problem that we tend to solve in and around the city.
Awesome. Greg?
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Dobler. So a little bit about me. I was trained as a physicist, and then I was an astrophysicist for about a decade before I decided to switch over to something with a bit more social impact and decided to start working on urban issues, which led me to the Center for Urban Science and Progress, or CUSP. CUSP, so just to say a little bit about what CUSP is and what we do. So CUSP is sort of a hybrid animal. It's a combination academic, public, private, startup environment. So we are a center within NYU. We are also tightly partnered with the New York City agencies and also some industrial partners, and we have academic partners as well. So CUSP is mission-driven. Our mission is basically it's twofold. So the first is to sort of advance the science of cities. So basically treating the city as a system to be studied and to understand if there are sort of underlying laws. And the second is to help New York City agencies solve city problems by bringing all kinds of techniques to bear, computational techniques, domain expertise, et cetera, to bear on these problems. I myself, the domains I work in are time series analysis, computer vision, image processing, machine learning, et cetera.
Awesome. Thanks. John?
Hi, my name is John Krause. I'm a tech fellow at the GovLab at NYU, which is a research center broadly focused around using technology to improve governance, and including open data as part of that technology. One of my responsibilities at GovLab has been to take part in the New York City Transparency Working Group, which is kind of a collection of good government groups that tries to put some pressure on the government to release more open data, do better with open data, but we generally consider ourselves kind of in a partnership role to try and do the best we can with that. I also have kind of a second life as a Civic hacker and have worked to scrape a whole bunch of data sets that aren't open off or weren't open at the time from various sources and make them publicly accessible. So that included the collision data sets from the NYPD before those were truly open, and more recently tax bills data to get rent stabilization information for at a building level, which was not previously available.
All right, great. And Ben.
I'm Ben Wellington. I guess during the day I work at an investment company called 2 Sigma, where I've been doing kind of data work. I have a PhD in natural language processing, and so was at NYU. Along the way, I married an urban planner, got into municipal data in that way. Started looking through the open data set and started a blog called iQuant New York. It seems to be best known these days for figuring out how to get an even number on your Metro card, which is not my proudest accomplishment, but that seemed to have gone a little viral, 1905 trick, whatever. And now they have a new button, 2725. Yeah, it's very exciting times. But more seriously, my goal is to use open data to explore and show that, look, if you release data to the public, cool things can happen. The public can help make government better and make a better democracy. So that's it.
Cool. So you've already touched on this, but let me just underscore a little bit. Each one of you, in some way or other, is contributing to the greater good. Can you speak to just what you see as your mandate, or maybe less literally than mandate, your personal responsibility to the public? Amin.
Sure. I think with MODA, the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, but with MODA, when I started, we essentially looked at, when I started, MODA hadn't sort of owned any particular projects as an organization. What we do is we engage with agencies, and actually agencies reach out to us. It's not unlike sort of people are familiar with 18F. It's not unlike sort of the 18F business model, which is agencies reach out to us. Here's a problem. Can you work with us on it? So MODA never really owned anything. So for when I started, what I began to look at was, well, when I'm no longer the chief analytics officer, the director of MODA, and when Mayor Bill de Blasio is no longer the mayor of New York City, how do we continue doing a really important work and sustain sort of what we do? And I looked at safety. And so the mandate that MODA has is to engage in 2 particular initiatives. We manage end-to-end 911 calculation project, and we also do emergency management data work. And so our 2 core projects that we do, end over end, leader over leader, will revolve around safety. So for us, safety is of most paramount, and we spend a lot of our resources focusing on that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I mean, personally, as a citizen of New York City. What about the others? Do you have a sense of personal responsibility towards the public, even though you don't have a formal government role?
So I can give 2 answers. I can give an institutional answer and a personal answer. So from an institutional standpoint, CUSP was essentially created. So as when it was created, it was essentially created for the mission of helping the city. And insofar as the city helps, people, have better quality of life, our mission was to have people have better quality of life as well. And there are sort of many projects that go on there, everything from air quality monitoring to park quality assessment, all kinds of things that are directly aimed at sort of improving the quality of life of the citizens of New York. Personally, yes. So the whole reason I got into this in the first place was because, I was working on, as an astronomer, I was working on very interesting material. Making lots of fun discoveries, having a really good time. Astronomy's super cool. Everybody knows that, I think. And then, if not, you should know astronomy's super cool. But at some point, I was like, okay, well, can I use my superpowers for the forces of good as opposed to the forces of neutral? Right. So that's why I made the switch.
Very good. John or Ben, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think when I first saw that or heard that question, I reacted really negatively to the mandate because I think doing work around this that's mostly independent of an organization, it feels strange often. I do something and then you are kind of the contact person for some data you scraped or something like that, and it's a weird responsibility where you're not. It's a lot of work and you're not being paid for it, to put it bluntly, and it doesn't feel great sometimes, but at the same time, I think I must feel some sort of personal responsibility or some sort of like that I'm doing something good because I continue to do it. It's not like I feel like I've been burned and I don't want to touch this stuff anymore.
So you infer your personal responsibility by your own behavior.
I think so.
Okay, great. Inferring from the data, empirical evidence. There we go. I like it. Ben, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the blog started just as an offshoot from a class I was teaching. I wanted to make statistics fun for urban planners, and to do that, I kind of threw out the textbook and started using city data, and I found all these interesting things to make homework interesting. And then I was like, well, it's interesting to my students. Maybe it'll be interesting to the internet. And I started putting them on. It started to kind of go from there. And at first, I would have said, no, I don't know what you're talking about when you asked that question. But it's been like a year and a half, and as I started to look around at the space and coming in from the outside with very little knowledge and seeing, wait, the NYPD is releasing crash data in PDF. Like this is to me it was like crazy, and came across some of John's work and as I started to look around, I kind of felt like these stories need to be told, and they need to be told in a way that is not boring to frankly nerds. The general public might be interested in PDF scraping. Right? Most people don't care unless maybe you're into data. So I realized that if I could kind of tell this story and put an interesting narrative on and work with sort of city data, that people would start to care about that. And so yeah, now I kind of feel like maybe an accidental advocate, but I do feel kind of a responsibility to keep carrying that forward. So
Awesome. Okay, so they've alluded to a couple of specifics here. We've heard what they're up to at a high level. Let's dig into some of the specifics. What data do you actually, A, have access to, and B, use in your work? So, Ahmed, let's once again start with you because of your unique position.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, so with MODA, and we sit in the mayor's office, clearly it's the mayor's office of data analytics, we can engage citywide. And so, I don't go out and proactively get data. Like I said, agencies come to us and say, hey, got a problem, can you work with us? And so oftentimes when agencies do that, the projects that we engage in usually require multiple data sets from a ton of agencies. And so at that point, we go out and we engage other agencies to get data, and we get feeds, and then those feeds essentially keep going on in perpetuity. So over time, we have this mechanism called, this tool called Data Bridge, where we essentially are getting data from, and we do it via the sharing platform called Deep, and we just get data from multiple agencies. So we get data from a lot of agencies. Oftentimes, for emergency management reasons, we get data from Con Ed, and so we do get data from private entities as well. But it's pretty much we get data from around the city.
You just have all the data.
Well, I guess maybe I wasn't clear. We don't have all the data. We get it as we need it, but we keep it. We do keep it, and so at least that. But yes, I can go to any agency. I can knock on any agency's door, and with a particular mission, a particular problem or challenge in mind, I can request the data.
Got it. So how does that compare to you, John or Ben?
I mean, I guess I was thinking as Amin was speaking about the experiences I've had where, there's all this stuff that I can't email anybody and ask them and present like a compelling reason why I need it. But it's actually kind of fun because I feel like the last couple of years for me, there will be something I'm interested in, then I'll notice something or hear someone mention that, oh, you can find this piece of data hidden somewhere. So it's like a little hunt for stuff sometimes. I think that's how it was with the stabilization data, where I found out that the borough president had interns who were pulling stuff off of tax bills and like writing them down in a spreadsheet. So it's just it's kind of like I don't know. It's just looking for stuff. It's just like looking for stuff in odd corners
Can I add something to that? That's not dissimilar to what we do, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone in my office doesn't know where every stitch of data is and who has it. And as a matter of fact, sometimes it's counterintuitive which agencies have what data sets. And so we happen to have data scientists, civic hackers on staff who have that same level of curiosity, who do exactly what you do. But yes, we do have a city hall on our email address, so that makes it a bit easier to engage the agencies. But we do as much digging and prodding and, you know, investigation, going online, checking out websites, Pluto website, okay, who owns this data? Where can we go to get this data and get a feed directly in, and so on and so forth. So
wait, go back to the part where you get the data and get a feed directly in. See, that's where the difference is.
No,
so
absolutely.
we get the PDF. You say, hey, I see that PDF. Can we have the data? No problem.
No. We never get a no problem to PDFs, but yeah,
every PDF has a backing CSV or something somewhere. So I know that the data's back there. So eventually you can hook up.
Yeah, right.
Not literally everyone, sorry, but the ones that are just long tables, like have some data. I mean, the NYPD thing that you were scraping was coming from that's right. Somewhere it's coming from somewhere.
There's lots of handwritten records out there also.
Right. I don't mean every data set. I mean these large tables that are like hundreds of pages of PDFs. Like they come from something.
Yeah, the mainframes in the catacombs is somewhere in someone's basement.
Yeah, granted. Yeah.
Okay, so Greg, let's hear a little bit about your data collection process, because I think it's a little bit different. And I'm actually going to fuse this with my next question, which is for you to please tell us your greatest municipal data success story or example.
Okay. So let's see. So at CUSP, we actually do kind of all of the above and then an extra little layer. So because we're partnered with the city agencies, we do, in a sense, get data that's not publicly available from city agencies to, say, help them with some problem. But we also use open data that's publicly available. We also generate our own data in the form of sensor data. So CUSP has a couple sort of key facilities. Two of the ones that are probably most important to mention are we have a data facility, which essentially is kind of like a warehouse of data where we sort of bring in data, open data, data that is provided to us by city agencies where we're trying to solve a particular problem. And then one of our other facilities is called the Urban Observatory. I'm the chief scientist of the Urban Observatory. And there, so the concept of this thing, so the concept of this thing is very much like an astronomical observatory. With astronomy, you look up at the sky and try to figure out what's happening in the heavens just by looking at it. The Urban Observatory kind of just takes images of the city from a distance and tries to figure out what's going on just by looking at it. And so that data, that sensor data, also gets ingested into the data facility. So we kind of have these three different types of data that come in, and making those interoperable and generating inferences off of those and solving problems is sort of one of our sort of core tasks. Now, the one about the data from the city that's sort of not publicly available sort of goes into what I would say is for me one of our biggest sort of municipal data success stories, and one of our greatest partnerships was with the Department of Parks and Recreation. So CUSP is also a degree granting institution. So we give master's degrees in urban informatics, and we have student capstone projects where teams of students will interact with, say, a city agency on data that they have to solve one of their problems. And so the Parks Department came to us and said, look, we have 10 years worth of inspection records for the Department of Parks for our couple thousand parks. We use sort of only aggregated statistics from that. We think there's a lot more information that we can get out of that. What can you guys do? Can we do something with this? And we said, okay, well, let's have a capstone project. And we basically work towards identifying spatiotemporal trends in parks inspection data. Which has then sort of filtered through to the deputy commissioners, and so that's been sort of one of our best success stories.
At the end of the day, you might actually be influencing policy.
Potentially, I hear that there's been some discussions of. So one of the things, one of the sort of key outcomes of that work was to essentially generate a new metric for what constitutes sort of a good quality versus poor quality park, because there's a lot of data, only some of which is getting aggregated into the quality assessment of a given park. If you can sort of integrate more data there, you might get sort of a better, your gut check for what a park sort of feels like in terms of quality might more closely match some of the sort of aggregated inspection data. And so that's sort of that was one of our sort of best success stories.
Great. John, how about you?
I think the the collision data is probably a good example of a success with open data, where the police department had started to release these crazy PDF printouts of an Excel spreadsheet. So I wrote some stuff to turn that back into a CSV, basically. And then with a friend of mine, Noel Hidalgo at Beta NYC, went to the city council a few times and spoke about this and why this wasn't good, and why you really should just be releasing the underlying spreadsheets. And that did happen, partly I think because it was so ridiculous that the best data source about collisions wasn't being hosted by the city, and it wasn't on the open data portal, and it really was much simpler and looked better if they just published the original data as a CSV. And now it's a daily stream on the open data portal as opposed to a monthly update, which it was before. And I think one of the really satisfying things about that too is the fact that it wasn't so obscured anymore meant it was possible to take a holistic view, a holistic look at that data and say, okay, the way that we're actually collecting collision data is problematic. It's collected at intersections, so you don't have any concept of collisions that happen mid-block or in front of specific locations, which is obviously not very good if you're trying to figure out how to improve street safety at anywhere that's not a corner. So I think that the conversation, it helped shift that conversation from, these things are really hard to read online to the underlying data collection is problematic. How can we do that better and use that to, improve the legislation with Vision Zero?
Great. Ben, how about one more concrete example? I know you have some juicy ones.
I guess maybe my favorite was sort of poring over New York City taxi tipping data and banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out, a very simple question, which is when you hit that 20% tip button, what are you tipping on? And you'd think that would be an easy question to answer with the data. It turned out, and after doing some digging, that it depended on the vendor of the computer in the back of the cab. So we have creative mobile technology cabs and Verifone cabs. Half the cabs in New York were actually tipping on top of tolls, taxes, base fare, and any surcharges, and the other half were only doing it on the base fare. So that means I calculated that half the city's cab drivers were making $350 more a year in tips because of this computer software in the back. Now, is this a big deal? I mean, it's a little. I don't want to have to think about the computer when I get back into the back of the cab to know whether I should type in other amount or not. This has been happening for a decade, right? And there have been many academic studies of this data, but the problem sometimes when you put data just with academics in an academic study is that because the data is not public, people can't go reproduce the results. You kind of, reproducibility kind of breaks down with academic studies. Academic studies should kind of accompany public data, so we don't see that as much. But when I wrote about that, within a few weeks, they reprogrammed all the cabs in New York. So I made half the cabs in New York more expensive. Now all cabs tip on if you tip. Sorry, if you hit the 20% button, now you're tipping on tolls and taxes, whereas before you weren't. So maybe that's not a good thing. At least it's equitable. At least the drivers all make the same amount of money, and at least in a highly regulated industry, there's some uniformity. So. All
right, success story.
I'm not going to get into the ethics of tipping on tolls or not. That's a separate conversation, not a data-driven one.
Right.
But
Okay, awesome. So in some of your responses, I've begun to sense a little bit of a tension between a couple of things. Those of you inside government, okay, so maybe it's not all sunshine and roses, and those outside who have to resort to crazy hacking in order to get data. So I think on the one hand, there's a bit of a tension between government insiders. Amin hates it when you call him a government insider, and civic hackers on the one hand, but also I think it's overlaid by a tension between open data and privacy to some extent, because that's part of why the government doesn't want to release data. So I was wondering I'll leave it open. Who wants to weigh in on open data versus privacy, or government insiders versus civic hackers?
I'll jump in on the government insider.
I said that just to provoke him.
Even though I'm not a government insider. I've been working for the government, in government, 2 years in DC and 1 year here. So I'm fairly brand new to government. But I think that there is a relationship between the community and government that oftentimes must be adversarial to see things become successful. There's this really great, I'll take about 10 seconds to tell this really great story about Philip Randolph, who was a labor activist, African-American, who sat with President Kennedy and said, you need to be helpful here. You need to drive these efforts and these policies. And President looked back at him and said, I could, but your job is to make me do it, right? And so I think there was an understanding of a relationship that needed to exist between these two entities in order for strong policy and success to happen in government and outside of government. So I do think that the relationship has to be one that where these entities can work together, but they should be adversarial. When I started this job, I knew of the Civic Engagement Group, and I studied them more than I studied the agencies and what the agencies were doing before my first day, because I knew there was a sense of how important you guys were in driving some of the work that MODA did, and I just think that I agree with some of the things that you guys think about. I disagree with some of the things that you guys think about, and I think that's only fair, and I think it's the same way. And so it's always a good, strong-spirited engagement, and that's the way it has to be, and that's my sense.
So coming from a place that sort of straddles the line, so to say, the only thing I'll say about it is that, one of the reasons that it's so important for that conversation between the government and, say, the hackers to happen is that, there are data sets that are coming, and data sets that these guys definitely want to look at, data sets that we all want to look at. As we all know, data is not clean, right? It doesn't come to you, like sometimes it comes to you as a PDF of an Excel file and you have to do a lot of stuff. But there's other layers beyond just that sort of technical limitation. For example, just to give you an example, I don't think I'm giving anything away here. With the work that we did with the Parks Department on the inspection data, for example, there were lots of sort of records that had to be sort of mashed together. Every park has like a unique identifier that's just some 4-character number in their system. And when that park gets rezoned, that can be completely different. And so, it could all of a sudden look like, a quarter of the park's property has disappeared when that's not what happened at all. And so you actually, you have to sort of have that conversation so you can, on the one hand, folks who don't work in the government can help the government, essentially solve people's problems and sort of make things better for the people. And on the other hand, you have to have the conversation so that the inferences that you're making, so that the conclusions that you're drawing are not essentially a fluke or a data error or something like that.
I guess we could imagine a world where that dialogue can happen kind of openly. And imagine Jira or whatever task management system you use. Imagine reporting bugs on data sets on the New York City Open Data Portal. Right, that would be an exciting future if the
imagine that.
Huh?
Imagine that.
I know, and I'm not. Yeah. I know you'd love that too. Yeah,
fun.
I'd be on board. So I'm not saying all around or having a data set owner that was actually still working there would be awesome. Things like that. Could really make a difference in that sense too.
I should also say to Amon's point before, when things like that come up, where there's some kind of weird quirk in the data that you need to get around, it's not like every member of the city agency knows the answer to that data field, right? And so, I would be in conversations with somebody from the inspections division and say essentially, okay, well, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, well, we have to talk to GIS and we'll get back to you on that one, right? So it's not an easy chain, and I think so. Maybe part of what I'm saying is like the conversation has to happen, but also it has to be sort of recognized that the overhead for getting a lot of this information out can be very high.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly right, what both of you said. But I would also add that there's a myth out there that somehow internally to government, we all share clean data with each other, and then we just send the crap over the wall to the public. Like, I can't tell you. I mean, that's one of the things that my team spends a lot of time doing, which is saying, like, agency so-and-so, like, really? This is what you're giving us? But because we do projects with them, that conversation is actually a daily conversation, either over email or sitting down. We call ourselves, MODA refers to ourselves, we refer to ourselves as data therapists, because a lot of times we sit down with agencies, and sometimes the people that are giving us the data knows really very little about the data that they're sharing with us. Sometimes it's like a deputy general counsel person or something like that. And so we have to talk to them about the data and how we need it and how it has to be and so on and so forth. And so we go through the same process. The quality is based on the usage of the data. And so we do what you do. We put analytics together. We put projects together, and we do experiments, and we say, this just doesn't look right when we give it back to the operational agency and say, oh, that's because your data set is not complete, and so on and so forth. And we have that conversation on a consistent basis. So we deal with the same things, maybe not to the extent we have some inside,
So I hear you saying that it's not all sunshine and roses with the data inside the government, but that you do have the conversation, and that's what may be important then for those outside the government to be able to have that liaison to make sure that they understand the data, don't make false inferences, and so forth.
It's not. That's literally why you have an office called Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, because it's not all sunshines and roses with the data.
Got it.
I should note that if you look at the taxi data, there are some trips that go back in time, so that's pretty cool. and when I reached out to them, they were like, yeah, it's not us, it's the taxi vendors because it gets kind of interesting because the TLC can't manipulate that data, then it looks kind of weird. So they're kind of forced. They're kind of in the middle, saying we can't clean this data up because that would us manipulating data. So there are a lot of issues that aren't even that get kind of complicated.
And examples like that are really blatant.
I don't know, Greg. Maybe a wormhole. The taxi went in and went back.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe,
I was doing like speed analysis. Like this guy's a fast. Wait a minute.
So, but also, also things like that are very blatant. But there can be data errors or small biases that you wouldn't notice, but you can then say, oh well, here's this huge effect that's actually an accumulation of small subtle biases.
So I had a ton of things on this list that we were going to talk about, and we're getting a little bit low on time. So let me just finish maybe with this question, and then we're going to open it up to hear from questions from the audience in case you have questions. So I think I know the answer for some of you, but I'm going to pick on you, John. To what extent do you try to actually directly shape policy using data? Or are you just trying to influence public perception and so forth?
I mean, I think I do try a little bit. I certainly have I have opinions about what action people should take based off of data I publish, but I try not to let that skew what I'm doing in any way. So I think an example of that might be with the stabilization data. There's been a legislative fight between some preservationists in Greenwich Village.
Can you just say a tiny bit of background on the stabilization data?
Sure. So the stabilization data, rent stabilization is the biggest affordability program in New York. It covers 1 million different apartments around the city. And it has kind of very loose legislation behind it. So it's pretty vulnerable, actually, to being destabilized, deregulated, no longer affordable. So there was a little line in tax bills where you could get exactly how many apartments in a building were stabilized. This was not available anywhere else. So whenever anybody tried to say how many stabilized units they were actually using this ridiculous survey that's probably 50 or 60,000 units off in the city, which is a lot of units even in New York. So I went through these PDFs and pulled these numbers off and did a big aggregate thing and released that data. And I haven't.
It was several months, right? The job had to run.
It
wasn't trivial.
It's still running, actually. But for other stuff, not for the stabilized.
The job to collect the data ran for several months.
Yeah, to collect the bills. Yeah, there's
Good
a lot
God.
of bills.
Foil that they give you a cost of it, right?
Right. No, that's funny. So I asked the Department of Finance very nicely for the bills. And they said, oh, sure, we'll give you the bills. That's no problem. No privacy, no nothing. It's all good. We just want $50,000. So I didn't have $50,000, so I just have been running a script.
It was the cost that they said it would cost them to give that.
They had a number of hours it was going to take.
Give him the PDF, the pile of PDFs.
Yeah,
it's like drag and drop. But
and it was. I wasn't asking for the underlying data, just the PDFs they already had on their website, which is a lot. It's probably a terabyte of PDFs, but still.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
Anyway, so long story short, you can get these numbers on here. There's been a fight between the Real Estate Board of New York, which is a big real estate interest, and these preservationists in the West Village about changes to how landmarks work. So to make it, in short, make it easier to derail the landmarks process so that a building that's up for being landmarked won't be. The Real Estate Board wants fewer landmarks. The preservationists in the West Village want more landmarks. Pretty straightforward argument between them. One of the arguments preservationists have made is that landmarks actually protect affordable housing by protecting stabilized units. REBNY took my data set and did a very simple analysis of it and said, oh, look, in areas where there are more landmarks or landmark buildings actually lose more stabilized units than non-landmark buildings, which clearly means that
correlation is causation.
Oh, of course. And when you're only looking at two factors, also across boroughs. So I did I basically emailed the Greenwich Village people and was like, I'm sorry for your ridiculous, threat from REBNY here. And did a somewhat more fine-grained analysis, as well as pointing out the basic flaw that if you look at two factors and find a connection between them, that clearly they're related. So I think that's my one entry into like directly influencing policy, but I don't have a problem with the real estate interest using the data. I think that's great. I want people to have
use it
available.
correctly, ideally.
Well, no, they can as long as they use it badly in a really public fashion and then can be shamed. I actually don't care.
It's actually to his point. That's the open data thing is so important because when data is closed and people say something, it's not shaming, but like it's sort of reproducibility, and then build either building on top and finding the same findings. Right, when the Wall Street Journal writes something, they should put up the data along with it, and we're not seeing that today.
Yeah.
We're seeing it from some. WNYC is doing that, but yeah. So it's not just shaming. Sometimes it might be shaming, but it's also just like impact, right? If you do something to put out that data, you're gonna have more of an impact.
It's good to be able to have a reasoned argument where the people are working with the same data set. That's really powerful.
Okay, we're over time, but I'm going to close. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you for a tweet-length answer, so count your characters, to the following question. What is the most exciting thing that is coming up or that you could imagine there being in public data usage, municipal data usage? Greg.
So what I would say is...
Tweet length.
You've got 9 more characters, buddy. Let's go.
Sensors.
Awesome. Sensors.
Yeah, no, okay, a little bit more. So there's a lot of discussion. I'll be real short. There's a lot of discussion about smart cities and the future of smart cities happening. There's a lot of sort of sensor deployments that are happening in various cities around the country. Sensors are the wave of the future.
There you go. There's your tweet right there. John.
Metadata and searchability. It's really freaking hard to find municipal open data right now.
Very nice. I didn't count characters, but it was cool. Anand.
We released a plan on July 16th of 2015, a strategy and vision for open data, and it's open data for all. So expanding, these guys talk about open data, but expanding access to open data to communities that don't normally have access to technology and data. And so we're aggressively moving in that direction.
Awesome. I think you're over your character limit, but I like the answer so much, I'll let it slide. And Ben.
New York City should release code like New Orleans does.
Very good. All right. Thanks, guys.